Is Stranger Things 5 bad? And if it is struggling a bit, is there a way for us to view it, a perspective that we can come from that helps us enjoy it more? Because let's be honest, Stranger Things is great and we want to love it. Welcome to Philosophy All Along. I'm a professional philosopher and I like to use the tools of philosophy to help me understand the things I love, like Stranger Things, on a deeper level. Okay, if you're feeling a little bit like Stranger Things 5 is struggling, you're not alone. And it's not just because maybe we're not always getting what we want from the plot. Oh, you want to see certain characters together, or you want to see certain kinds of things happen, or you just really like the first season and you just don't like where it's going. No, there's some structural stuff that's come up. So what I want to do with you here very briefly is look at what some of those actual structural issues are. Look at one complaint that I've heard that really is entirely off the mark and is really just kind of people whining about it. And then I want to look at, are there some ways, some perspectives that we can use to help us enjoy the show, even if maybe it isn't as strong in some of its structural stuff as it has been in the past. Okay, so what's the stuff that's kind of the struggles? Well, things like the fact that there's way too much exposition. What do I mean? You see people complaining where they're like, oh, it's really boring, there's not enough action. What they really mean structurally is that there's a lot of people explaining things instead of actually showing them happen. Probably the best example of that is Will talks about what he sees when he comes out in Vecna's vision for him, but we never actually see it. So instead of showing us these characters who we come to love and trust responding poorly, maybe in emotionally abusive ways, and it's really traumatic, which then would lead to us feeling like, wow, he's even braver when he goes and he comes out to his friends in the real world. We don't get that. We kind of get it after the fact, like, oh, I need to tell you this thing and I had this really bad vision, and so it doesn't have as much power. Now you might say, well, isn't the worry that we don't want to see those actors or those characters actually respond in those abusive ways? Sure, there's still other ways to do it, like show Vecna about to show him and then show the aftermath, maybe Will sitting there by himself crying and everyone's left him, and so that we know what the consequence is. And then when they go into the real world and he's doing this and we don't see him end up alone, it's a nice difference. So if you look through Stranger Things 5, especially the most recent kind of middle drop, you'll just see that there's a lot of people explaining stuff instead of actually showing stuff. And that's just kind of a cardinal rule of story writing. Don't tell us that, like, Erica is really angry. Show us by, even as a writer, you can say something like Erica's brow furrowed and she tightened her fist, something like that. Okay. The other issue that we're starting to have is the ensemble cast is so large that for the actual length of the show itself, we are not getting enough time with their relationships. If you look at the number of relationships that we want to see develop or interact or see how these people figure out how to navigate with each other, ranging from Hopper and Elle to Will and Dustin, there's just, now we have 8 and 11, we have all of these different people who are supposed to be interacting, and we're kind of getting like movie length episodes in some cases. We're not really kind of getting what we need of each interaction. And so that's just a fact of the matter of having that many characters and having that many interesting relationships between them and not really having enough time to develop them all. And sometimes you're just kind of dropping them in instead of having shown us how that relationship was impacted or changed. And we see that happen with 8, right? She's just telling us that 11 needs to sacrifice herself, but we really aren't seeing much of the reason why, right? Okay. Speaking of people like 8, we have these kind of retcon villains, particularly in the case of this new military researcher who kind of comes out of nowhere. So we don't, unlike with someone like Vecna, who we've seen this character develop, and season 4 was pretty much all entirely having the mystery of why he does what he does shown to us, as opposed to him saying, so then when I was young, I had this experience, right? It's shown to us. When it comes to this character who's in charge of the military, it's kind of a retcon from the fact that we thought we were kind of done with them. And now all of a sudden, okay, no, Elle's actually not safe. The deal that Hopper made doesn't matter. So it feels a bit like a retcon. And it makes it a little bit unmotivating because you want to actually understand why the villains are doing as they're doing. And I think you have a similar kind of feeling about 8, where it just feels a little bit like I don't entirely understand why the person is coming from where they're coming from. The show is, in its structure, a little bit unscary, right? If you look at some of the other seasons, you really have not just pop out moments, but moments of it being really, really kind of scary. Season 4, episode 1, right? Chrissy's moment, right? That really got people. You don't really have that here in this season. And so I think that kind of connects to the fact that 11 is kind of underused, right? So you don't have the same kind of scary experience. 11 is kind of the person who helps us overcome the truly terrifying things about it. And so I think people are feeling like the main protagonist of the story is being a bit underutilized, and that might be a fair criticism. This all kind of leads to what is called jumping the shark in a show. So jumping the shark, you probably already know, is when a show starts hitting a point where they're just having to do more and more extreme things to kind of keep our attention. It comes from the television show Happy Days, where there was a point in time where one of the characters, the Fonz, literally like skis over a shark, basically. And so it kind of became famous as the moment when the show started not really making sense. There's a point when Nancy Wheeler kind of pops out and starts just like killing military personnel that doesn't entirely seem to track with her character, and it does make sense, but also it kind of doesn't. Like, oh, we just want to see her being a badass, and so we're going to put her in that situation. So it kind of feels like it's jumping the shark. Okay, so those are all the things that kind of, okay, yeah, maybe there are some actual structural reasons why we might be struggling a little bit with our enjoyment of the show. Okay, so one criticism I think that really just doesn't work, isn't really sensible, is really just people not getting what they want, so complaining, is there's this complaint that there should be a relationship between Will and Mike. And that the fact that we're not given that relationship is queer baiting. So basically, the problem is really a common problem where what'll happen with shows, or even like out there in the world with like department stores and stuff like that, you get these gestures kind of towards support for the LGBTQAI community, but then you never actually do it. And so some people are saying, oh, well, we were being promised a relationship between Will and Mike, but then we never actually see it. But it doesn't really make sense. I don't think they really ever dangled that over our heads, because Mike always seemed really very dedicated to 11. So it really wouldn't make sense for him to also come out. If anything, it would kind of cheapen the importance of Will coming out as he does. So that, I think, is just one of those things where we have a relationship that we want to see happen, or some people have a relationship that they want to see happen, are just mad that they're not seeing it, and then kind of finding a reason to complain about it. But that particular relationship wouldn't make sense. Are there ways in which they could have probably done better with Will's coming out scene? As I mentioned before, I do think that they kind of tell rather than show. Sure. But that complaint, let's be honest, sometimes we just like to complain about things. And there's a lot of relationships that we want to see happen in the show that we're not going to get to see. There's just too many of them. And we can't always get what we want. So that's just kind of that. So, okay, how can we maybe enjoy the show a bit more? I think good critics don't just say, oh, here's what's wrong about a thing, but they actually kind of give us stuff that we can look for, that we go, oh, that's actually a perspective I hadn't thought about that makes it maybe more enjoyable. And I think there's some really kind of obvious stuff here. So one is when we kind of complain about the show being maybe like not as scary as it could be, it's because it's a particular kind of genre. If you look at Stranger Things, they hit on different kinds of horror and science fiction, right? The first one is kind of like a psychological thriller in a lot of ways. It's a little Alfred Hitchcocky, and also definitely some Stephen King in terms of like, you don't entirely know if someone's crazy. It gives you a little bit of a Vertigo film kind of aspect to it. And then we get with something like season 3, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? So they give us these different films that they're intending to emulate, or these different genres that they're intending to emulate. If we look at season 5 as post-apocalyptic horror, kind of like action horror. So if you look at something like Resident Evil, like the first film is, okay, we're kind of stuck in this one small space in this building, and it's a bit more pop outs and stuff like that. By the time you progress further down, the world's already been taken over by the zombies, and now we're trying to survive in it. So that's a lot of what's happened here. It gestures more towards like Stephen King's The Stand, the final ending between good and evil, and these other post-apocalyptic stories, or stories that are coming up to the apocalypse. So I think if we look at it from that perspective, we go, oh, okay, well that makes sense. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing in that regard. And we need to remember that this show is not intended to be one where they're going to red wedding everyone. I just don't think that that's ever the way that they wanted to go. I think the fact that people are feeling like, oh, there's too much plot armor, we always already knew that, right? They kill characters that we're not that connected to or are fairly early on. That's been the rule of thumb the entire time. Maybe they'll change that. Maybe they'll, finally give us some finality with a character by the end of the show. But for the moment, they really never have. It would be a genuine shift in the way that they did things. Like even when we thought that Hopper might be dead, they gave us a teaser, right? They gave us a tag at the end where they're like, oh, the Americans here, right, in Russia. And it leaves you going, wait, is that Hopper? But it still was like, it's Hopper. They've never wanted us to be really totally believing that these characters are just all going to die. They basically said as much. So the plot armor is pretty thick, sure, but that's been there from the beginning. That's not new. And if they did kill off a bunch of beloved characters, it honestly would be a huge deviation from the way that the show usually works. There are really strong things about the show to pay attention to. One of those is the whole character arc with Holly. That really matches what they were doing at the beginning. You have these younger children who are trying to navigate this thing, and hopefully we'll see the interactions of those children develop even more, as opposed to them just kind of be like a C-level plot device. The actress is doing a great job who plays Holly. The other characters, so we have Derek's character, right? He's doing a great job. These are interesting developments, and seeing the tension between those children is really interesting. So I think that that's a thing to watch for, and it's good because the other characters who are more adult, for one, we're less motivated and concerned about their deaths because now they've kind of grown up, but also their arcs can only go so far. Basically, our choice is either to kill Steve or kind of let his arc kind of disappear. Why? Because Steve has kind of nowhere else to go. And so the rule of thumb in stories is if someone has no more growth, you end them or you end their story. I personally am not dying to see Steve die, so we can just kind of let his story, taper off and let other characters grow into that. And so Holly's one of those characters. And honestly, they're doing that part of the plot is really well written, really interesting, really motivating. So, we want to look at this like, I think that the solution kind of is, for anyone who's struggling with it a little bit, is recognize the fact that this show functions like a D&D campaign. It was always kind of intended to do that. And if, for those of you who have played D&D, you know a few things about it. One, it's going to get complex. Two, you're going to want to have usually a happy ending, because the people who have been participating in this campaign for a long time don't want it to be this really kind of tragic end. But also, you usually can't comfortably kill off your players, not the characters. Sometimes you might kill off characters and then the player will pick up a different character and move along in the story. But the fact of the matter is your players are your friends. They're the people you've invited over your home to play with you. So if you're like, no, your character's dead, you're dead, bye, well, that defeats the whole purpose. And so if we look at these main characters as people with whom we're playing D&D, what the show is really doing is providing us an opportunity to kind of see the end of their story and say goodbye. It's a bit of a swan song. It's a bit of an opportunity to kind of spend a little bit more time with them before it moves off into some sort of spin-offs or whatever else. That the story itself has been telling us through this entire season that it's supposed to have a happy ending, that everyone's not supposed to necessarily die in this way. How do we know? Because Will said as much, that in his campaigns, that's how it's supposed to end. Basically, everyone ends up in a better situation, right? And that's a very meta level commentary on the show on itself. May it not do that? Sure, I guess it could. I guess it could end in this horrible, you know, everyone dies or lots of people die, something very real. But that's usually not what D&D is like, right? It's supposed to be kind of fun at the end of the day, not supposed to leave you kind of traumatized. So I think if we look at the show as a kind of D&D campaign and recognize the fact that it was always intended to be a bit of fantasy, a bit of play in a cool and creepy world that has tried out these different suits of different kinds of horror and science fiction, it still ends up being a lot of fun. Is it going to be perfect? No. Basically, no show is. But we love the characters. We love the writing. We love what's done. And let's be honest, it's about to end. So it's a really great opportunity to just sit down with some popcorn and enjoy it, and be a little sad that something that's been so great for about a decade now is leaving us. So if I got something wrong, if there's stuff that I'm missing, you totally disagree, go ahead, pop it in their comments. If there's stuff you happen to agree with, it's always nice to hear. It's great to talk with you all in the comments. Please do like, please do subscribe, share it with other people if you think anything here is interesting. It helps the channel grow. Appreciate you, and I hope you enjoy the finale on New Year's Eve. Have a wonderful day.